Cole Dawson froze in the saddle, one gloved hand gripping leather as wind howled through the canyon gap. Through the broken slats of the widow Hart's shack, he watched her feed her children scraps disguised as supper. Potato peels fried golden, stale bread soaked soft, three small faces believing the smile she wore like armor. His chest locked tight. He knew that hunger. He knew that lie. And when he rode home to his sprawling ranch and untouched roast, Cole Dawson, who'd clawed his way out of poverty and asked nothing from anyone, couldn't swallow a single bite. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if it grabs you, hit that like button and stay until the end. You won't regret it. The wind off the Medicine Bow Range came down hard that March, carrying sleet and the smell of wet pine. Cole Dawson rode through the edge of town just past dusk, collar turned up, hat brim low, the kind of posture that said he had business and no interest in conversation. He'd made the 20-mile trip into Redemption Ridge for fence wire and lamp oil, the kind of errands that didn't require thought, only motion. His saddlebags were full. His mind was empty. That was how he preferred it. But the horse spooked. Not badly, just a sidestep, ears flicking toward the row of clapboard structures leaning into the hillside like old men too tired to stand straight. Cole steadied the mare with his knees, scanning for the source. A dog, maybe. A rattler still sluggish from the cold. Then he saw it. Through the broken slats of the furthest shack, lamplight flickered. A woman moved inside, her shadow stretching long against the warped planks, and three smaller shadows sat waiting at a table that looked like it might collapse if someone sneezed. Cole told himself to ride on, told himself it wasn't his concern. But the mare had stopped, and his eyes had already adjusted, and what he saw through those gaps in the wood punched the air clean out of his lungs. The woman was cooking, or pretending to. She stood at a cast-iron skillet over a fire so weak it barely threw heat, turning something in the pan with the care of a French chef preparing a feast. Her movements were precise, confident. The children watched her with the kind of reverence that made Cole's throat tighten. She lifted the skillet, tilted it just so, and slid the contents onto 3 tin plates. Potato peels, fried crisp and golden, stale bread, torn into chunks and soaked in bacon grease until it softened. A smear of something that might have been butter or lard or hope. "There we go," the woman said, her voice bright as new paint. "A proper supper." The oldest child, a girl maybe 9 or 10, picked up her fork. "Smells good, Mama, doesn't it?" The woman sat, folding her hands as if they were about to dine at the finest table in Cheyenne. "Eat slow, now. Savor it." The children obeyed. And the woman smiled. Cole had seen smiles like that before. He'd worn one himself years ago when his own mother had served him cornmeal mush and called it cake. The kind of smile that wasn't a lie, exactly. More like a shield. A way to stand between your children and the truth long enough for them to stay children a little while longer. His hands tightened on the reins. The smallest child, a boy no older than 5, looked up at his mother with eyes so trusting it hurt to witness. "Can we have more tomorrow, Mama?" The woman's smile didn't falter. "We'll see what the day brings, sweet boy. We'll see." Cole pulled his gaze away and kicked the mare into motion. He rode the last 2 miles to his ranch in silence, the wind biting at his face, his mind locked on an image he couldn't shake. 3 children eating scraps like they were blessed, and a woman holding herself together with nothing but will. When he reached the ranch, the house stood dark and solid against the night. 2 stories. Stone foundation. Glass windows that didn't rattle when the wind blew. He'd built it himself, board by board, after spending his first 5 years in Wyoming sleeping in a dugout with a dirt floor and a roof that leaked every time it rained. He unsaddled the mare, fed her oats, checked the latch on the henhouse. The motions were automatic, muscle memory carved from routine. Inside, he lit the lamps and stood in the middle of his kitchen, staring at the iron stove, the shelves stocked with flour and sugar and coffee, the cold roast sitting on the counter under a cloth. He cut a slice, set it on a plate, sat down, and couldn't eat. The potato peels, the stale bread, the woman's smile. He pushed the plate away and walked to the window, staring out at the darkness. Somewhere out there, 3 children were curled up under threadbare blankets, bellies half full, dreaming that tomorrow might be different. Cole Dawson, who'd spent 15 years building this ranch with his own hands, who'd pulled himself out of poverty through sheer stubborn will, who'd made a rule never to look back. Looked back. He remembered the winter he was 7, when his father died in a mine collapse, and his mother took in washing just to keep a roof over their heads. He remembered eating boiled potatoes for weeks, the same potatoes every night until he couldn't stand the sight of them. He remembered the day she'd smiled at him across a table just like that widow had smiled tonight, and he'd believed her when she said everything would be fine. 3 months later, she was dead. Fever, exhaustion, hunger dressed up as hard work. Cole had been sent to an uncle who didn't want him, worked like a mule until he was old enough to leave, and swore he'd never be hungry again, never be helpless, never need anyone. He'd kept that promise. But the widow's children weren't him, and maybe, just maybe, they didn't have to be. The next morning, Cole rode into Redemption Ridge before dawn. The general store didn't open for another hour, but he knew Sam Terrell kept early hours. He knocked on the side door, hat in hand, and waited. Sam opened it in his undershirt, suspicious. "Dawson? Hell you want at this hour?" "Need to buy some things." "Store opens at 7. "I'll pay extra." Sam studied him, then stepped aside. "Come on, then." Inside, the store smelled like coffee and sawdust. Cole moved through the aisles, pulling items off the shelves, a sack of flour, a dozen eggs, a pound of bacon, a jar of preserves, a tin of coffee, a cone of sugar wrapped in blue paper. He added a small cloth doll, hesitated, then grabbed a wooden top and a picture book. Sam watched from behind the counter, arms folded. "Someone's birthday?" "Something like that." "That'll be $4.60. Cole paid in cash, loaded everything into a burlap sack, and rode out before the sun broke the horizon. He left the basket on the widow's doorstep just as the sky turned gray. No note, no explanation. Just food, neatly packed, and the small toys tucked underneath. Then he rode to the ridge above the shack and waited. An hour later, the door opened. The woman stepped out, barefoot despite the cold, a shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. She looked down at the basket, went very still, then glanced left and right as if expecting to see someone watching. Cole held his breath. She knelt slowly, pulled back the cloth covering the food, and her shoulders shook. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then she lifted the basket, carried it inside, and closed the door. Cole let out the breath he'd been holding and turned the mare toward home. 3 days later, he returned. The basket sat on the doorstep, cleaned and folded. A single wildflower, a prairie rose, early and stubborn, was tucked into the handle. Cole stared at it. Then he filled the basket again. By the second week, it had become routine. He rode into town before dawn, left the basket, and watched from a distance as she retrieved it. She never left the flower in the same place twice, sometimes in the handle, sometimes tucked under the cloth, once braided into the burlap itself. He started adding things. A jar of honey, a small sack of cornmeal, a bar of soap that smelled like lavender. And she started leaving things in return. The first was a drawing, crude and earnest, of a house with a smoking chimney. A child's hand had signed it in careful letters. "Thank you." The second was a small wooden bird, whittled smooth, wings spread as if in flight. The third was a book, old, spine-cracked, pages yellowed, with a note slipped inside. "For your kindness. We have little, but we share what we can." Cole sat in his kitchen that night, the book open in his hands, and realized he was in trouble. Mom. He told himself it was charity, a good deed, the kind of thing any decent man would do if he had the means. But that didn't explain why he started checking the doorstep twice a day, or why he found himself thinking about her voice. The way she'd set a proper supper like she was serving roast duck instead of fried peels. Or why he lay awake at night wondering if the children were warm enough, if the roof leaked, if she ever let herself cry when they were asleep. He didn't know her name. He didn't know if she was young or old, sharp-tongued or soft-spoken, whether she sang or stayed silent. But he knew the shape of her shadow, the way she moved, the strength it took to smile like that. And he knew, with a certainty that settled in his chest like a stone, that he couldn't stop. On the 15th day, he rode into town and found Sam Terrell watching him from the store window. "Morning, Dawson," Cole nodded, loading supplies into his saddlebags. "You know," Sam said slowly, "folks are starting to talk." Cole's hands stilled. "About?" "About how much food you've been buying, and how none of it's showing up at your table." Cole straightened. "That's so." "Just saying, small town. People notice things. Let them notice." Sam raised his hands. "No offense meant. Just thought you'd want to know." Cole mounted his horse and rode out without another word, but the damage was done. By the end of the week, the whispers had started. He heard them in fragments, at the livery, at the saloon, in the post office where Mrs. Calloway's voice carried like a church bell. Buying enough food for a family, chua, riding out before dawn every day. That widow woman, you don't suppose... Cole clenched his jaw and kept moving. Let them talk. He'd survived worse. But then he saw her. She was standing outside the dry goods store, a basket on her arm, her face pale and tight. Two women walked past her without a word, their skirts swishing, their eyes cutting sideways. The widow lifted her chin and walked on, but Cole saw the way her hands trembled, the way she held herself like glass about to shatter. And he knew. The town had turned her kindness into scandal. That night he sat on his porch and stared at the basket he'd filled for the next morning. Flour, eggs, bacon, sugar, coffee. He could stop, ride into her life and back out again, leave her to fend for herself the way she had before. It would be easier, safer, the smart thing to do. Cole Dawson had built everything he had by being smart. But when he closed his eyes, he saw 3 children eating potato peels like they were blessed. He saw a woman holding the world together with a smile and a prayer, and he knew he couldn't walk away. Not now. Not ever. He loaded the basket onto his horse and rode toward town in the dark, the wind cold against his face, his heart beating steady and sure. Whatever came next, he'd face it, because some things, some people, were worth the risk. Well, the next morning the doorstep was empty. Cole stared at the space where the basket should have been, his chest tight, his mind racing. She'd never failed to return it before, never missed a day. He circled the shack twice, checking the back door, the woodpile, the narrow gap between her place and the neighboring structure. Nothing. He rode back to the ridge and waited. The door stayed closed. By noon, he was pacing. By dusk, he'd made a decision. If the town wanted to talk, let them talk. He was done hiding. The next morning, Cole Dawson rode down Main Street in full daylight, the basket visible in his arms, his hat tipped back so his face was clear for anyone who cared to look. People stopped, stared, whispered. He didn't slow down. At the widow's door he dismounted, basket in hand, and knocked. Silence. He knocked again, harder this time. The door cracked open. A sliver of face appeared. Dark eyes, pale skin, a mouth pressed into a thin line. "Mrs. Hart," he said quietly. Her eyes widened. "You?" "Yes, ma'am." She glanced past him at the street, where half the town had gathered to watch, her face flushed red. "You shouldn't be here." "I know. People are talking." "I know that too." "Then why?" "Because I'm done pretending." He held out the basket. "And because I'm asking you to marry me." The street went silent. The widow, Lila, he'd learned her name was Lila, stared at him like he'd lost his mind. Maybe he had. But before she could answer, before she could slam the door or laugh or cry, footsteps sounded behind him. Cole turned. The Reverend stood at the head of a small crowd, his face stern, his Bible tucked under one arm. "Mr. Dawson," he said slowly, "I think we need to have a conversation." Cole met his gaze without flinching. "I think we do." And as the town closed in, as Lila's hand tightened on the doorframe and her children peered out from behind her skirts, Cole Dawson stood his ground, because he'd spent his whole life running from hunger and shame, and he was done running. The Reverend's shadow stretched long across the packed dirt, and the crowd behind him shifted like cattle sensing a storm. Cole didn't move, didn't lower the basket. didn't step back from Lila's door. "Reverend Mitchell," he said evenly. The older man's jaw worked beneath his gray beard. "Mr. Dawson, this is irregular." "Is it?" "A proposal made in the street, in front of the entire town, without proper courtship or without asking your permission first, you mean?" A murmur rippled through the onlookers. Mrs. Calloway clutched her shawl tighter, her face pinched with disapproval. Beside her, Tom Hendricks from the feed store crossed his arms, while his wife Martha looked between Cole and Lila with something that might have been sympathy. Reverend Mitchell's eyes narrowed. "That's not what I—" "Then what?" Cole shifted the basket to one arm, his voice carrying clear and cold. "Because, from where I stand, the only irregular thing happening in this town is how fast good people turn charity into scandal." "Mr. Dawson." "She's been feeding her children potato peels." The words came out harder than he intended, each one landing like a hammer. "Fried scraps, stale bread soaked in grease, and every single one of you walked past that shack and did nothing." Silence crashed down. Someone coughed. A horse stamped in the street. Leela's voice came soft from behind him, barely above a whisper. "Cole?" He turned, and the sight of her stopped him cold. She stood in the doorway with her 3 children pressed against her skirts, her face pale but her spine straight. Her dark hair was pulled back severe, revealing the sharp angles of cheekbones that shouldn't have been quite so pronounced. But her eyes, brown and clear and fierce, held his without flinching. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly. "Yes, ma'am. I do. Not for us, not if it costs you. The only thing it costs me is knowing I could have helped sooner and didn't." He held out the basket again. "I'm not asking you to take charity, Mrs. Hart. I'm asking you to take me." Her breath caught. Behind her, the oldest girl, Emma, he'd learned from town gossip, stared at him with wide eyes. The middle child, a boy named Thomas, gripped his mother's skirt with white knuckles. And the youngest, little Samuel, peeked around Lila's legs with the kind of cautious hope that made Cole's chest ache. "You don't know me," Lila said, her voice shaking now. "You don't know what you'd be taking on. I know you fed your children on nothing and made them believe it was a feast. I know you returned every basket I left with something precious because you couldn't stand to just take. I know you've got more strength in your little finger than most men have in their whole bodies." He paused. "That's enough for me. The town can say what it wants." Reverend Mitchell cleared his throat, stepping closer. "Mrs. Hart, perhaps we should discuss this inside, away from—" "No." Lila's voice came sharper now, and she lifted her chin. "If Mr. Dawson is willing to stand here and speak his intentions in front of everyone, then I'll do him the courtesy of answering the same way." Cole's heart kicked against his ribs. Lila looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face like she was reading a book written in a language she'd almost forgotten. Then she glanced down at her children, at Emma's hopeful expression, and Thomas's uncertainty, and Samuel's small hand clutching at her dress. "You're serious," she said finally, "about all of it?" "Yes, ma'am." "The children, too." "Especially the children." Her eyes filled, but she blinked the tears back hard. "I won't be a burden. I can work, I can cook and clean and mend and—" "I'm not asking you to earn your place, Lila. I'm asking you to share mine." The use of her first name rippled through the crowd like wind through wheat. Mrs. Calloway made a scandalized noise. Someone else whispered, but Cole kept his gaze locked on Lila's face, waiting. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I don't—" her voice broke. "I don't understand why." "Because when I look at you, I see home," Cole said simply. "And I've been looking for that my whole life." The street held its breath. Then Emma stepped forward, slipping past her mother's restraining hand. She was thin, too thin, with dark braids and eyes too old for her face. She looked up at Cole with the kind of seriousness only children who've grown up fast can manage. "Are you the one who left the basket?" she asked. Cole crouched down to her level. "Yes, miss." "And the doll?" "That too." "Why didn't you tell us?" He glanced at Lila, then back at Emma. "Didn't want your mama to feel obligated. Wanted it to be a gift, not a debt." Emma considered this, her small face thoughtful. Then she turned to her mother. Mama, I like him. Thomas, emboldened by his sister's bravery, nodded. He brought the top, and the book. Samuel just stared, his thumb creeping toward his mouth. Lila's face crumpled, just for a second, before she pulled it back together. Children. Mrs. Hart. Reverend Mitchell's voice cut through, firm now. I must insist we move this discussion somewhere more appropriate. The middle of Main Street is exactly right. Cole straightened, facing the Reverend square. Because this town made it their business the moment they started whispering, so they can hear it straight. Mr. Dawson, your intentions may be honorable, but there are proprieties. Proprieties. Cole let the word hang there, bitter. Tell me, Reverend, where were these proprieties when Mrs. Hart's husband died and left her with 3 children and a shack that's falling down around their ears? Where were they when she started selling off her furniture piece by piece just to buy flour? Where were they last month when she fainted outside the butcher's shop because she hadn't eaten in 2 days? Martha Hendricks gasped. Tom's face went red. Reverend Mitchell's expression tightened. We've offered assistance, You've offered judgment. Cole's voice cut like a blade. You've offered pity and gossip and turned a blind eye when it suited you. Well, I'm not turning a blind eye. I'm standing here in front of all of you and asking this woman to marry me. And if that offends your sense of propriety, Reverend, then I suggest you take it up with someone who cares. The crowd erupted. Voices overlapped, some angry, some shocked, a few, very few, murmuring approval. Mrs. Calloway's voice rose above the rest, shrill and indignant. This is disgraceful. The man barely knows her. And to suggest that the town has let children starve while policing how a widow keeps her dignity. Cole turned to face the crowd fully now, his voice carrying over the noise. Every single one of you knew. You saw her walking to the well before dawn so no one would see how worn her dress was. You saw her children getting thinner. You saw, and you did nothing except cluck your tongues and talk about what a shame it all was. That's not fair, Tom Hendricks protested. We didn't know it was that bad. You didn't want to know, Cole shot back, because knowing would have meant doing something about it, and it's easier to whisper than to help. Silence dropped like a stone into water. Then a new voice spoke up, old Bill Carver, the blacksmith, stepping forward from the back of the crowd. He's got a point. Head swiveled. Bill shrugged, his weathered face impassive. We all saw, he said gruffly. We all knew things were hard for Lila after John died, and we all told ourselves it wasn't our place to interfere, that she was proud, and she'd ask if she needed help. He looked at Lila, something like shame crossing his features. But pride don't fill bellies, and we should have done better. Martha Hendricks nodded slowly. Bill's right. We should have. This is beside the point, Mrs. Calloway snapped. The question is whether it's appropriate for Mr. Dawson to... The question, Lila said, her voice ringing clear and strong, is whether I accept. Every eye turned to her. She stood taller now, her hand resting on Emma's shoulder, her chin lifted in a way that reminded Cole of the day he'd first seen her through the slats of that shack, holding her world together with nothing but will. Mr. Dawson is right about one thing, she said quietly. You all saw. You all knew. And whether it was pride or pity or politeness that kept you silent, the result was the same. My children were hungry and I was drowning, and not one of you threw a rope. Mrs. Calloway opened her mouth. Lila raised a hand. I'm not saying that to shame you. I'm saying it because it's true. And because Mr. Dawson here... She looked at Cole, and something shifted in her expression, something warm and raw and real. Mr. Dawson saw the same thing you did. But instead of looking away, he did something about it. Every single morning for 3 weeks, he left food on my doorstep. No name, no conditions, no expectation of thanks or repayment or anything except that I'd feed my children. Her voice thickened. She swallowed hard. He gave us dignity when the rest of you offered pity. He gave us hope when we'd almost run out. And now he's standing here in front of all of you, asking me to let him give us more. She paused, her eyes shining. So yes, the answer is yes. The street erupted again, but this time the noise was different, less scandalized, more astonished. Cole felt something release in his chest, something he hadn't realized he'd been holding clenched. "Lila," he started. She stepped forward, closing the distance between them, and took the basket from his hands. Her fingers brushed his, warm despite the cold morning air. "But I have conditions," she said firmly. He blinked. "Conditions?" "I won't be a kept woman. I'll work. I'll earn my place at your table and in your home. I'll pull my weight and then some. And if you've got expectations of me beyond that, you'd better lay them out now." Cole felt a smile tug at his mouth despite everything. "My only expectation is that you be yourself." "That's a dangerous thing to ask for. You don't know me very well." "Then I'll learn." She searched his face again, and whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy her. "All right then. When?" "When what?" "When do we marry? Because if we're doing this, we do it proper. I won't have anyone saying I trapped you or you took advantage of me or—" "This afternoon," Reverend Mitchell cut in, his voice resigned but not unkind. "If you're both determined to proceed, we'll do it this afternoon, at the church. 3:00. Lila glanced at Cole, eyebrows raised. He nodded. 3:00? She agreed. The Reverend sighed, looking between them like he was trying to decide whether to argue further. Then he shook his head. "Very well, but I wanted on record that I advised a longer engagement." "Noted," Cole said dryly. The crowd began to disperse, some reluctantly, others hurrying off to spread the news. Mrs. Calloway left in a huff, her skirt swishing indignantly. But Martha Hendricks paused, stepping up to Lila with a tentative smile. "Congratulations," she said softly. "And I'm sorry. Bill was right. We should have done better." Lila's expression softened. "Thank you, Martha." Martha nodded and moved on, and slowly others followed, offering awkward congratulations or apologies or simply quiet nods of acknowledgement. Bill Carver clapped Cole on the shoulder hard enough to make him stagger. "You're a good man, Dawson. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." "Appreciate that, Bill." When the street finally emptied, leaving only Cole and Lila and the three children staring up at them with varying degrees of confusion and hope, Cole let out a long breath. "Well," he said. "That was terrifying," Lila finished. "Completely terrifying." "Yeah." They stood there in the sudden quiet, the basket hanging between them like a bridge. Then Samuel tugged at Lila's skirt. "Mama, are we going to live with the basket man?" Lila laughed, shaky and bright. "Yes, sweet boy, we're going to live with the basket man." "Does he have horses?" "He does." Samuel's eyes went wide. "Can I ride one?" "We'll have to ask him." Cole crouched down again, meeting Samuel's gaze. "You can ride one, soon as you're big enough to reach the stirrups." Samuel's face split into a grin so wide it looked like it might crack. Thomas inched closer, his voice cautious. "Do you really have a ranch?" "I do." "Is it big?" "Big enough for all of us." Emma, ever the serious one, frowned. "Mama says we shouldn't take things we haven't earned." "Your mama's right," Cole agreed. "But this isn't taking, it's sharing. There's a difference." "What's the difference?" "Taking means someone loses something. Sharing means everyone gains." Emma considered this with the gravity of a philosopher. Then she nodded, apparently satisfied. "Okay." Lila let out a breath that sounded suspiciously like a sob held back. "Children, go inside and start packing your things. We'll be leaving after the ceremony." "All our things?" Thomas asked. "Everything important." The children scampered inside, their voices rising in excited chatter. Lila watched them go, then turned back to Cole, her face unreadable. "I meant what I said," she told him quietly. "I won't be dead weight. I'll work." "I know. And I won't let you regret this. I won't." "You can't know that." Cole stepped closer, close enough to see the fine lines around her eyes, the faint scar on her chin, the way her hands trembled just slightly, even though her voice stayed steady. "You're right," he said. "I can't know, but I'm willing to find out. Are you?" Lila looked up at him, and for the first time since he'd knocked on her door, she smiled. Not the shield smile she wore for her children, but something real and small and fragile. "Yes," she said. "I think I am." They stood there on the doorstep, the basket between them, and the whole uncertain future stretching ahead. And Cole thought maybe, just maybe, he'd finally found what he'd been searching for all along. Not a rescue, not a good deed. A home. The morning sun broke through the clouds, washing Main Street in pale gold light. Inside the shack, the children's voices rose in laughter, and Lila Hart, soon to be Lila Dawson, looked at the man who'd fed her children in secret and asked for her hand in public, and believed, for the first time in a long time, that tomorrow might be different after all. Cole cleared his throat. "I should go. Let you get ready." "Wait." Lila reached out, her hand closing around his wrist. "I need to know something first." "All right." "Oh, why me?" "Really? There are easier women in this town. Women with means, with families, with—" "I don't want easy," Cole interrupted. "And I don't want means or families or whatever else you think I should be looking for. I want someone who understands what it means to fight for something. Someone who knows the difference between surviving and living. Someone who'd turn scraps into a feast just to see their children smile." He paused. "I want you, Lila. Not in spite of what you've been through. Because of it." Her eyes filled again, and this time she let the tears fall. "I don't know how to do this. How to be someone's wife again. How to trust that it won't all fall apart. Then we'll figure it out together, one day at a time." She nodded, swiping at her cheeks with the back of her hand. "One day at a time. Starting at 3 o'clock. "Starting at 3 o'clock, she agreed. Cole tipped his hat, mounted his horse, and rode toward home, the morning air cold against his face, and his heart beating steady and sure. Behind him, Lila watched until he disappeared around the bend, then turned back to her children and the life they were about to leave behind. The shack had been home for 2 years, 2 long, hard years of making do and holding on. But it had never been more than shelter. 4 walls and a roof that leaked. A place to survive, not to live. She looked around at the worn furniture, the patched curtains, the floor she'd scrubbed on her hands and knees 100 times. Then she looked at her children, at Emma organizing their meager belongings with fierce determination, at Thomas clutching the wooden top like a treasure, at Samuel spinning in circles with his arms out wide. "Mama," Emma called, "what should we bring?" Lila smiled, real and true. "Everything that matters, sweet girl. Everything that matters." At Cole's ranch, the man himself stood in the middle of his too big, too empty house and tried to imagine it filled with life. Footsteps on the stairs. Voices in the kitchen, toys scattered across the floor he'd kept so carefully clean. It had been quiet for so long, safe, controlled. He'd built this place as a fortress against the world that had nearly broken him. 4 walls to keep him in and everyone else out. But now, standing in the silence, he realized something. A fortress was just another kind of prison. He walked through the rooms, seeing them with new eyes, the kitchen that could hold a family instead of one solitary man, the bedrooms upstairs, empty and waiting, the front porch where children could play and a woman could sit in the evening sun. It wasn't perfect. The house needed warmth, light, laughter. It needed them. Cole rolled up his sleeves and got to work. He scrubbed floors that didn't need scrubbing, beat rugs that were already clean, filled the wood box and checked the stove and made sure there was fresh water in the basin. Then he stood in the largest bedroom, his room, and stared at the bed. It was wide enough for 2. He'd made it that way without really knowing why, some vague hope that someday, maybe, he wouldn't sleep alone. Someday had arrived faster than he'd expected. He stripped the bed, washed the linens, hung them to dry in the sharp wind. Then he remade it with care, tucking the corners tight, smoothing the quilt his mother had made years ago, the only thing he'd kept from his childhood. When he was done, he stood back and looked at the room. Clean, simple, ready. He hoped it was enough. At noon, he rode back into town, bathed and shaved and wearing his best shirt, the one he saved for cattle auctions and the rare occasions he needed to look respectable. He felt ridiculous. He felt terrified. He felt alive. The church sat at the top of the hill, white clapboard gleaming in the thin sunlight. Cole tied his horse to the rail and climbed the steps, his boots loud on the wooden planks. Inside, Reverend Mitchell was arranging hymnals, his movements precise and careful. He looked up as Cole entered, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Dawson, Reverend, you're early. Wanted to make sure everything was in order." The Reverend set down the hymnals and faced him fully. "Are you certain about this?" Cole met his gaze without wavering. "More certain than I've been about anything in my life. Marriage is not something to be entered into lightly, particularly with 3 children involved." "I know that. Do you?" The Reverend's voice gentled slightly. "Because it's one thing to provide for a woman and her children out of charity. It's another to wake up every morning and choose them, to put their needs before your own, to be a father to children who aren't your blood." "Blood doesn't make a family," Cole said quietly. "Choice does." Reverend Mitchell studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. "You might be right about that." "I am right." "We'll see." The Reverend moved toward the altar, adjusting the cloth. 3 o'clock then. I'll keep it simple." "Appreciate it." Cole turned to leave, but the Reverend's voice stopped him. "Mr. Dawson?" "Sir?" "For what it's worth, I think you're doing a good thing. I just hope you understand what you're taking on." Cole smiled, thin and hard. "I grew up hungry, Reverend. I know exactly what I'm taking on, and I know what it means to finally have enough." He left before the man could respond, stepping out into the cold afternoon air and the future rushing toward him like a freight train with no brakes. At 2:45, the townspeople began to gather. Not everyone. Mrs. Calloway was conspicuously absent, and a few others stayed away out of disapproval or indifference. But more came than Cole expected. Martha and Tom Hendricks arrived with a basket of food. Bill Carver brought his wife and 2 grown sons. The schoolteacher, Miss Allen, came with a small bouquet of winter roses. Even Sam Terrell from the general store showed up, looking uncomfortable but determined. They filed into the church quietly, taking seats in the pews, their faces curious and cautious, and, in some cases, genuinely kind. Cole stood at the front beside Reverend Mitchell and tried not to let his hands shake. Then the door opened and Lila walked in. She'd done something with her hair, pinned it up so it caught the light filtering through the windows. She wore a dress Cole hadn't seen before, simple and dark, but clean, with a white collar that made her skin look like porcelain. She carried no flowers, no veil, just her 3 children, one on each side and Samuel holding her hand. Emma wore a ribbon in her hair. Thomas had combed his hair flat. Samuel's face was scrubbed pink. They walked down the aisle together, a small, determined unit, and Cole felt his throat close. This was his family. Not someday. Not eventually. Now. Lila reached the altar and looked up at him, her eyes steady. "Hello?" "Hello," he managed. Reverend Mitchell cleared his throat. "Shall we begin?" And so they did. The ceremony was short, as promised. Simple words about commitment and fidelity and choosing each other in sickness and health, poverty and wealth, joy and sorrow. Cole repeated them like a vow carved into stone. Lila's voice shook on some of the words but never faltered. When the Reverend asked if anyone objected, the silence was absolute. And when he pronounced them married, Cole leaned down and kissed Lila Hart, now Lila Dawson, with all the gentleness he possessed, while 3 children watched and the town held its breath. When they pulled apart, Lila was smiling, really smiling, and Cole felt something in his chest unlock and open wide. "Welcome home," he whispered. "Thank you," she whispered back. They turned to face the congregation, hands linked, children clustered close. And as the townspeople rose to offer congratulations, some sincere, some awkward, all witnessed, Cole Dawson understood that the hard part was just beginning. Building a family was harder than building a ranch. But he'd never backed down from hard work in his life. And he wasn't about to start now. The wagon ride to the ranch took an hour, the children bundled in blankets Cole had brought, Lila sitting beside him on the bench with her hands folded in her lap. She hadn't said much since they'd left the church, just watched the landscape roll past, scrub pine and sage, the mountains rising dark against the gray sky. Cole wondered if she was having second thoughts. If the reality of what she'd agreed to was settling in now that the town was behind them, and the future stretched ahead like an unbroken road. But when he glanced sideways, she was smiling, small, private, like she was holding a secret. "What?" he asked. "Nothing." She looked at him, eyes bright. Just thinking how strange life is? This morning I was trying to figure out how to make one potato feed 4 people. Now I'm riding toward a ranch I've never seen with a man I barely know. Having regrets? No. She said it firmly, without hesitation. Just adjusting. Behind them, the children were quiet. Too quiet. Cole turned to check on them. Emma sat straight-backed, watching everything with sharp attention. Thomas clutched the wooden top against his chest. Samuel had fallen asleep, his head pillowed on a bundle of their belongings. "They all right back there?" Cole asked. "They're scared," Lila said softly. "They won't show it, but they are. Everything's changing so fast." "Can't blame them for that." "I told them you were kind, that you'd been leaving the baskets." Emma figured it out weeks ago, actually. She's observant like that. Cole raised an eyebrow. "She knew?" "Saw you once, apparently. Early morning, right before dawn. She didn't tell me until yesterday." Lila's voice went quieter. "She said she didn't want to spoil it, that she liked having a secret angel." Something twisted in Cole's chest. "I'm no angel." "No. But you cared when no one else did. That's close enough." They rode in silence for a while, the only sound the creak of the wagon and the rhythmic clop of hooves. Then Emma spoke up from behind. "Mr. Dawson?" Cole turned. "You can call me Cole if you want." She considered this, her face serious. "Mama says we should call you Pa." The word hit him like a fist. He looked at Lila, who'd gone pink. "I thought," she started. "I mean, if we're doing this properly, the children should—" "It's fine," Cole said, his voice rougher than intended. "More than fine. If that's what you want, Emma." Emma chewed her lip. "Can I try it first? See if it fits?" "However you want to do it." She nodded, satisfied, and went back to watching the landscape. But Thomas leaned forward, his voice tentative. "Do we have to call you Pa right away?" "No, son. You call me whatever feels right." "What if it never feels right?" Cole twisted around to meet the boy's eyes. "Then we'll figure something else out. I'm not here to replace your father, just to add on, I guess." Thomas absorbed this, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded once and settled back. Lila touched Cole's arm lightly, a thank you that didn't need words. When the ranch came into view, Lila went still. Cole watched her take it in, the house solid against the hillside, the barn with fresh paint, the corrals and outbuildings, the creek cutting silver through the meadow beyond. "This is it," he said unnecessarily. "It's beautiful. It's functional." "It's beautiful," she repeated, firmer this time. "You built all this?" "Most of it. Hired help for the barn roof and the well." "How long have you been here?" 15 years, started with nothing but a claim and a prayer." She looked at him with something like wonder. "You did this alone?" "Didn't have much choice." The wagon rolled to a stop in front of the house. Cole climbed down, then turned to help Lila. Her hand was warm in his, calloused from work, and she stepped down with the careful grace of someone who'd learned to make every movement count. The children tumbled out behind her, staring wide-eyed at everything. Samuel woke up, rubbing his eyes, and gasped when he saw the horses in the corral. "Mama, horses!" "I see them, sweet boy. Can I—" He looked at Cole hopefully. "Tomorrow," Cole promised. "When there's better light. Tonight we get settled." He led them inside, watching Lila's face as she crossed the threshold. The house was warm. He'd banked the fire before leaving, and clean, the floors swept and the windows letting in what remained of the afternoon light. Lila turned in a slow circle, taking in the main room with its stone fireplace, the kitchen with its cast-iron stove, the stairs leading up to the second floor. "It's so big," Emma breathed. "Bigger than we need," Cole admitted. "But it's home." Lila walked to the kitchen, running her hand along the edge of the table. "You have everything." "I do now." She looked at him sharply, then away. "Show us the rest?" He took them upstairs. There were 3 bedrooms, his and 2 others he'd kept empty for reasons he'd never quite articulated. Now they'd be filled. "This one's for the boys," he said, opening the first door. "And this one's for Emma." Emma stepped into her room like she was entering a cathedral. It was simple: a bed, a dresser, a window overlooking the meadow, but it was hers. She touched the quilt, then looked back at her mother with tears streaming down her face. "Mama." Lila crossed to her, kneeling down. "What is it, sweet girl? I don't have to share anymore?" "No, baby. It's all yours." Emma threw her arms around Lila's neck and sobbed. Thomas peeked into the boys' room, then at Cole. "Samuel snores. Then you can close the door." Thomas's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Where do you and Mama sleep?" Cole gestured to the third door. "There. Can we see? If your mama says it's all right." Lila stood, wiping Emma's tears and her own. "Go ahead." The children filed into the master bedroom, and Cole watched their reactions. It was the biggest room, with a wide bed and a window seat and space for a crib if... He cut that thought off before it could fully form. Samuel bounced on the bed experimentally. "It's soft." "Samuel Hart, you get down from there," Lila said automatically, then caught herself. "I mean, it's fine," Cole said. "Let him bounce." Samuel grinned and bounced higher. Thomas investigated the dresser. Emma stood by the window, looking out at the darkening sky. "You can see everything from here," she said softly. "That's the idea." Lila moved to stand beside her daughter, and Cole saw her shoulders relax, just a fraction, but enough to notice. She'd been holding herself taut as wire since they'd left town, but here, in this room with her children safe and warm and fed, something in her finally began to unwind. "All right, you three," she said after a moment. "Let's unpack what we brought and get ready for supper." The children scattered. Cole caught Lila's arm gently. "You all right?" She looked up at him, her eyes bright and wet. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up." "You're not dreaming." "How do you know?" "Because dreams don't usually involve 3 children and a widow who's too stubborn to cry in front of anyone." She laughed, shaky and surprised. "I'm not crying." "No, ma'am. Of course not." She swiped at her eyes, then squared her shoulders. "What do you have for supper?" "Whatever you want to make. Pantry's stocked." "You don't have someone who cooks for you?" "Just me, and I'm not much of a cook." "Then I'll earn my keep starting tonight." She moved toward the stairs, then paused. "Cole?" "Yeah?" "Thank you for all of this, for..." Her voice caught. "For seeing us." "Thank you for saying yes." She smiled, real and warm, and headed downstairs. Cole stood in the doorway of the bedroom he'd soon share with a woman he barely knew, listening to the sounds of his house coming alive. Footsteps, voices, laughter, and felt something settle in his chest that he couldn't quite name. By the time he made it to the kitchen, Lila had already started working. She moved through his space like she'd been there for years, finding the flour and the lard and the knife, her hands quick and sure. "What are you making?" "Biscuits. And if you have any meat, there's bacon and a ham I was saving." "Bacon's fine. Children need to eat soon or they'll get cranky." Cole watched her work, the efficient way she rolled dough and cut circles, the practiced ease of someone who'd made 1,000 meals from nothing and could probably make a feast from what he considered basic supplies. Emma appeared at his elbow. "Can I help, Mama?" "Ask her, not me." Emma crossed to Lila. "Mama, can I set the table?" Lila's hands stilled. "I don't..." She looked around, taking in the cupboards. "I don't know where anything is." "Plates are there," Cole said, pointing. "Forks and knives in the drawer, cups on the shelf." Emma opened cupboards carefully, reverently, lifting out plates like they were made of gold. Thomas joined her, and together they set the table while Lila cooked and Samuel sat on the floor playing with the wooden top. It was the most noise the house had ever held. When the food was ready, they sat, all 5 of them around the table that had only ever held one. Cole looked at the biscuits piled high, the bacon crisp and steaming, the butter melting in a dish, and felt his throat tighten. "This is..." He stopped. "This is a lot of food." "It's supper," Lila said firmly. "A proper supper." Emma reached for a biscuit, then hesitated. "May I?" "Yes, sweet girl, take as many as you want." The children ate like they'd never seen food before, and maybe, Cole thought, they hadn't. Not like this. Not enough. Emma took small, careful bites. Thomas ate methodically. Samuel stuffed a whole biscuit in his mouth and grinned. Manners, Lila said, but her voice was soft. Let them eat, Cole murmured. Manners can wait. Lila looked at him, and something passed between them. An understanding, maybe. A recognition of what it meant to finally have enough. When the meal was done and the children had been scrubbed and put to bed, Emma in her own room for the first time in her life, the boys sharing but with actual beds instead of pallets on the floor, Cole and Lila stood in the kitchen washing dishes side by side. They went down easy, Lila said quietly. They're exhausted. They're happy. She paused, her hand stilling in the soapy water. I can't remember the last time they went to bed happy. Cole dried a plate carefully. They're safe now. They can be happy. Because of you. Because of us. She looked at him, and he saw it again, that wonder, that disbelief that this was real. I don't know how to do this. Do what? Be married. Be here. In this house. With you. She swallowed hard. I don't know what you expect from me. Cole set down the plate and turned to face her fully. I expect you to keep being the woman who turned scraps into a feast and made her children believe in better days. I expect you to tell me when I do something wrong, because I will. I expect you to make this house feel like a home instead of just walls and a roof. And I expect... He stopped, choosing his words carefully. I expect you to take your time figuring out what this is, because I'm figuring it out too. What if I can't be what you need? What if you already are? She stared at him, her eyes searching his face. You really mean that? Yes. I don't understand you, Cole Dawson. Good. Gives you something to work on. She laughed, surprised and genuine, and the sound filled the kitchen like light. Then her expression shifted, turned uncertain again. The bedroom? I'll sleep in the spare room, Cole said quickly. Until you're ready, however long that takes. You don't have to... Yes, I do. I'm not asking you to rush into anything you're not comfortable with. We're married in name, but that's just paper. The rest, we build as we go. Lila's eyes filled. I thought most men wouldn't... I'm not most men. No, she said softly. You're not. They finished the dishes in silence, but it was a different kind of silence now, companionable, comfortable. When the last plate was dried and put away, Lila looked around the kitchen like she was memorizing it. This still doesn't feel real. Give it time. What if they come for us? Cole frowned. Who? The town. Mrs. Calloway and the others. What if they decide this was improper and try to be... Let them try. His voice went hard. You're my wife. Those are my children. Anyone who wants to challenge that can take it up with me directly. They could make things difficult. They could, but they won't, because most of them know I'm right, even if they don't want to admit it. He paused. And the ones who don't know it don't matter. Lila studied him for a long moment. You're not afraid of them. No. Why not? Because I spent my whole life being afraid. Of hunger, of failure, of being that helpless kid with nothing and no one. I'm done being afraid. He met her gaze steadily, especially of people whose worst sin is gossip. She nodded slowly, something easing in her expression. All right. All right. All right. I'll try not to be afraid either. That's all I ask. They climbed the stairs together, pausing outside the master bedroom. Lila's hand rested on the doorframe, her face uncertain. You're sure about the spare room? Positive. It seems wrong, making you sleep somewhere else in your own house. It's not my house anymore, Cole said quietly. It's ours. And I'll sleep wherever makes you most comfortable. She looked like she might argue, but then Samuel called out, a sleepy, half-awake sound, and she turned toward the boys' room instead. I should check on them. Go ahead. Cole watched her disappear into the shadows, then headed to the spare room, smaller than the master, with a narrow bed and a window that looked out toward the barn. He'd slept here before, in the early days when he was still building the house, before the master bedroom was finished. It felt strange being back, like moving backward instead of forward. But if that's what it took to make Lila feel safe, he'd sleep here for the next 10 years. He lay down on the bed, fully clothed, listening to the sounds of the house settling around him. Lila's footsteps moving between rooms. Emma's quiet voice asking a question he couldn't hear. Samuel's sleepy laughter. His family. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, it felt like coming home after a long journey he hadn't known he was on. Sleep came easier than expected, and with it, dreams of a future that finally looked like something worth fighting for. Morning broke cold and clear, sunlight streaming through the window and dragging Cole awake. For a moment he forgot where he was. Then memory returned in a rush. The wedding. The wagon ride. Lila and the children asleep somewhere in his house. Their house. He dressed quickly and headed downstairs expecting silence. Instead he found Lila already in the kitchen, coffee brewing, her hair tied back and her sleeves rolled up. "Morning," she said, not looking up from whatever she was stirring. "Morning. You're up early." Force of habit. Children will be hungry soon. "You didn't have to." "Yes, I did." She glanced at him, her expression firm. "I told you, I'm not going to be dead weight." "Lila, I mean it, Cole. I need to contribute. I need to feel like I'm earning my place here." He crossed to her, gently taking the spoon from her hand. "You earned your place the moment you said yes. Everything else is just us figuring out how to live together." "That's not how I work." "Then we'll compromise. You cook breakfast, I'll teach Samuel to ride. You mend the shirts I've been ignoring, I'll fix that rip in Emma's dress. We share the load." She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, but if I find you doing all the heavy work while You won't, I promise." She took the spoon back, her mouth quirking. "You're stubborn. Takes one to know one." The children came downstairs in stages. Emma first, quiet and watchful, then Thomas rubbing sleep from his eyes, and finally Samuel bouncing down the stairs like he'd been launched from a catapult. "Horses," he announced. "Cole said I could ride horses." "After breakfast," Lila said firmly. "And after you get dressed properly." Samuel looked down at himself, nightshirt hanging crooked, one bare foot, and giggled. "Oops." Cole bit back a smile and poured himself coffee. The kitchen filled with the sounds of morning, plates clattering, Samuel chattering about horses, Emma asking quiet questions about the ranch. It was chaotic and bright, and nothing like the silent breakfast Cole had eaten alone for 15 years. It was perfect. After the meal, Cole took Samuel out to the corral while Lila and Emma tackled the breakfast dishes, and Thomas explored the barn. The morning sun was warm despite the chill in the air, and the horses moved restlessly, sensing the boys' excitement. "That one," Samuel said, pointing at the mare. "The pretty one. Her name's Copper. She's gentle. Can I pet her?" "Hold your hand out flat. Let her smell you first." Samuel obeyed, his small hand trembling with excitement as Copper lowered her head and snuffled against his palm. The boy's face lit up like the sun. "She likes me." "She does. Think you're ready to sit on her?" "Really?" Cole lifted Samuel onto Copper's back, steadying the boy with one hand while holding the mare's lead with the other. Samuel's eyes went wide as moons. "I'm so high." "You're doing great. Just hold on to her mane, nice and easy." They walked slow circles around the corral, Samuel giggling every time Copper shifted beneath him. From the house, Cole caught sight of Lila watching through the window, her hand pressed to her mouth. When they finished, Samuel slid down into Cole's arms, chattering a mile a minute. "Did you see, Mama? Did you see me riding?" Lila had come outside, her shawl wrapped tight. "I saw, sweet boy. You were very brave. Can I do it again tomorrow?" "We'll see." Samuel ran off to find Thomas, and Lila moved closer to Cole, her expression soft. "Thank you," she said quietly. He's never had that before. Someone just giving him time and attention like that. He's a good kid. All of them are. They are. She paused. Their father wasn't cruel, but he wasn't warm either. Practical, distant. The children never really knew him before he died. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. It's just, this is new for them, for all of us." She looked up at him. "You're patient with them. They deserve patience. So do you." Before Cole could respond, Thomas came running from the barn, his face flushed. "Cole, there's a cat in the barn. Can we keep her? We can keep her. Even if she has kittens? Cole raised an eyebrow. She have kittens? I think so. There's a whole nest of them in the loft. Lila laughed. Of course there is. They spent the rest of the morning settling in, unpacking what little the family had brought, finding places for everyone's belongings, making the house feel lived in instead of merely occupied. Emma arranged her few dresses in the dresser with meticulous care. Thomas claimed a corner of the boys' room for the treasures he'd collected. Samuel alternated between bouncing on his bed and running to the window to stare at the horses. And Lila moved through the house like she was learning a new language, touching surfaces, opening cupboards, memorizing where everything belonged. By afternoon, Cole found her standing in the parlor, staring at the empty shelves. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. I'm just thinking. About? About how empty this all is. You've got this beautiful house, but there's nothing personal in it. No pictures, no books, no... I didn't have anyone to fill it for. She turned to look at him. And now? Now I do. A smile ghosted across her face. We'll have to fix that. Make it feel like a home instead of a museum. How? I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out. She moved toward the window, looking out at the land spreading vast and open. Do people ever visit? Neighbors? Friends? Not often. Nearest ranch is 10 miles south. We're pretty isolated out here. The children will miss having other children to play with. There's a school in town, 5 miles. I can take them when it starts up again in the fall. Lila's expression shifted. You do that? Why wouldn't I? I just thought most ranchers don't bother with schooling, especially not for... She stopped. For other people's children? Cole finished quietly. I didn't mean... They're my children now too, Lila, and they're getting an education. She stared at him, something fierce and bright building behind her eyes. Then she crossed the room in 3 quick strides and kissed him. It was brief, barely more than a brush of lips, but it landed like lightning. When she pulled back, her cheeks were pink. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have... Don't apologize. It was forward of me. It was honest. He caught her hand gently. And I'm not complaining. She looked down at their joined hands, her breath shaky. This is all happening so fast. We can slow down. I don't know if I want to. Then we won't. They stood there in the parlor, sunlight streaming through the windows, the sound of children playing somewhere outside, and something between them shifted, settled into place like a puzzle piece finding its home. I should start supper, Lila said finally. I should check the fence line. Neither of them moved. Then Emma's voice called from upstairs, something about Samuel getting into things he shouldn't, and the moment broke. Lila squeezed Cole's hand once, then let go and headed toward the stairs. Cole watched her go, then stepped outside into the bright cold afternoon, his heart beating steady and his mind quiet for the first time in years. Whatever came next, whatever challenges or complications or conflicts, they'd face them together, and that, he thought, was more than enough. The fence line ran along the eastern ridge, 3 miles of posts and wire that kept the cattle from wandering into the ravines. Cole rode it methodically, checking for breaks, his mind only half on the work. The other half kept circling back to the house, to Lila's kiss, to the way her hand had felt in his. He was tightening a loose wire when he heard hoofbeats approaching fast. He turned, squinting against the afternoon sun, and recognized Tom Hendricks's roan before he saw the man himself. Tom pulled up hard, his horse blowing foam. Dawson. Hendricks. Cole straightened, reading trouble in the other man's face. What's wrong? Town meeting, tonight, at the church. Cole's jaw tightened. About? About you and Mrs. Hart, or Mrs. Dawson, I guess. Tom shifted in his saddle, looking uncomfortable. Mrs. Calloway's been stirring things up. Says the marriage was unseemly, that it sets a bad precedent. She's got half the town worked up about propriety and Christian values and wants to make an example of us. Something like that. Tom hesitated. Reverend Mitchell tried to shut it down, but she went over his head. Got the mayor involved. They're calling it a community discussion about moral standards. That's what they're calling it. Yeah. Tom met his eyes. Thought you should know. Meeting's at 7. You don't have to come, but I'll be there. Might make things worse. Or it might end them. Cole swung back into the saddle. Thanks for the warning. Dawson, Tom called after him. For what it's worth, Martha and I think you did right, and we're not the only ones. Cole nodded once and kicked his horse toward home. He found Lila in the garden, or what passed for a garden, mostly weeds and last year's dead stalks. She was kneeling in the dirt, her skirts tucked up, her hands black with soil. The children were scattered around the yard, Emma reading under a tree, Thomas throwing sticks for a barn cat that had no interest in fetching, Samuel making roads in the dirt with a stick. It looked like a painting, like peace. Cole hated to shatter it. Lila looked up as he approached, shading her eyes with one dirty hand. You're back early. We need to talk. Her smile faded. What happened? He told her, keeping his voice low so the children wouldn't hear. Watched her face go pale, then set hard. They want to what? Discuss moral standards, which means they want to shame us into hell. I don't know what. Annulling the marriage, maybe? Making us prove we're respectable. How do we prove that? We don't. We tell them it's none of their business and we move on. Lila stood slowly, brushing dirt from her skirts. Cole, if the town decides if they turn against us completely, they already turned against you when they let your children go hungry. That was different. That was neglect. This is active hostility. So we face it head on. With 3 children watching, her voice cracked. With Emma finally feeling safe, and Thomas starting to smile and Samuel sleeping through the night for the first time in months? You want to drag them back to town so people can judge us? Cole caught her hands, stilling them. I want to stand up in front of everyone who whispered about you and tell them they were wrong. I want to show them that we're not ashamed of what we did. And I want you to hold your head high while I do it. I don't know if I can. Yes, you can. You've been doing it your whole life. She looked at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. What if they try to take the children? The question landed like a blow. Cole's hands tightened on hers. On what grounds? That I'm an unfit mother, that I married too quickly, under suspicious circumstances, She pulled away, wrapping her arms around herself. They could say anything, Cole, and some of it would be true. None of it would be true. I let my children eat scraps. I took charity from a stranger. I married a man I barely knew because I was desperate and... You survived. Cole's voice cut through her rising panic. You did what you had to do to keep your family alive. There's no shame in that. The town won't see it that way. Then the town can go to hell. Emma's voice piped up from under the tree. Mama, is something wrong? Lila turned, forcing a smile. No, sweet girl, everything's fine. But Emma wasn't fooled. She set down her book and crossed to them, her face worried. You're crying. Just dust in my eyes. You're a bad liar, Mama. Despite everything, Lila laughed, wet and broken. I know. Emma looked at Cole. Are we in trouble? Cole crouched down to her level. Some people in town aren't happy about your mama and me getting married. They want to have a meeting about it tonight. Why aren't they happy? Because they think we did things wrong, that we should have waited longer, been more proper. Emma's brow furrowed. But you were helping us. You left the baskets. I did. And Mama was taking care of us all by herself. She was doing her best. She was. So what did you do wrong? Out of the mouths of children, Cole felt something ease in his chest. Nothing, Emma. We didn't do anything wrong. Then why do we have to go to a meeting? Because sometimes adults make things complicated when they should be simple. Emma absorbed this with the seriousness of a scholar. Then she turned to Lila. Are we going? Lila looked between her daughter and Cole, her expression torn. I don't know if... We should go, Emma said firmly. If people are saying bad things about Mama, we should be there, so they can see we're a real family. Thomas had drifted closer, listening. I don't want to go to town. You don't have to, son, Cole told him. But Emma's right. Thomas's voice was quiet but steady. If they're talking about us, we should be there. Even Samuel had stopped playing, his small face uncertain. Are the people mad at us? Lila knelt down, gathering him close. Some of them are confused, sweet boy. But we're going to help them understand. How? By showing them we're happy, that we're a family, that we belong together. Samuel thought about this, then nodded against her shoulder. Okay. Cole met Lila's eyes over the children's heads. She looked terrified, determined, ready. All right, she said quietly. We go together. All of us. They cleaned up and changed into their Sunday clothes. The children scrubbed pink, Lila in her wedding dress because it was the nicest thing she owned, Cole in his good shirt and vest. They looked like a family heading to church, not a trial. The wagon ride back to town felt longer than it had 2 days ago. The children were quiet, sensing the tension. Lila sat rigid beside Cole, her hands clasped so tight her knuckles showed white. Whatever happens, Cole said low enough that only she could hear, we leave together. No matter what they say or threaten or demand, we're a family. They can't change that. They can try. Let them. Redemption Ridge came into view as the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the buildings gold and red. The church sat at the top of the hill, and every window blazed with lamplight. Wagons and horses crowded the street. It looked like the whole town had turned out. Cole's stomach nodded, but he kept his face calm. Beside him, Lila took a shaky breath. I can't do this. Yes, you can. Cole, look at me. He waited until she did. You're the strongest person I've ever met. You kept 3 children alive on nothing but will and love. You can face a room full of gossips. What if I break down? Then I'll be right there, and so will they. He nodded toward the children. We're in this together. Emma leaned forward from the back. Mama, you always tell us to be brave even when we're scared. Lila's eyes filled. I do, don't I? So be brave. When did you get so wise? I learned from you. Cole pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the church. The noise from inside was already audible, raised voices, arguments, the heavy thump of someone's fist on wood. He climbed down, then helped Lila and the children. They stood together in a small, tight cluster, and Cole felt a surge of something fierce and protective. This was his family, his, and he'd be damned if he'd let anyone take them apart. They walked up the church steps together. Cole opened the door. The noise cut off like someone had sliced it with a knife. Every face turned. Cole counted maybe 60 people, half the town, give or take. Mrs. Calloway stood at the front near the altar, her expression triumphant. Mayor Briggs sat in the front pew, looking uncomfortable. Reverend Mitchell stood off to the side, his face carefully neutral. Mr. Dawson, the mayor said, standing. We weren't expecting... You're having a meeting about my family, Cole said evenly. Seemed appropriate that we attend. Mrs. Calloway's mouth pinched. This is a private community discussion. About us, which makes it our business. It's about moral standards. It's about gossip dressed up as concern. Cole moved down the aisle, Lila and the children following. He could feel every eye on them, hear the whispers starting up again. You want to discuss whether my marriage is proper? Fine. Let's discuss it. Mayor Briggs held up his hands. Now, Dawson, there's no need to be confrontational. We're simply trying to... To what? Decide whether my wife is respectable enough, whether her children deserve a home, whether I had the right to help a family in need without asking your permission first. That's not... Mrs. Calloway started. Yes, it is, Cole's voice carried to every corner of the church. That's exactly what this is. You're all sitting here judging us because we didn't follow your rules, because we chose each other too fast, too publicly, without waiting for you to approve. There are proprieties, Mrs. Calloway insisted, standards of behavior that you ignored when Lila's children were starving. Cole turned to face her directly. Where were your standards then? Where was your moral outrage when a widow was selling her furniture to buy flour? When her children were eating potato peels because that's all she had? Where was this community concern when it actually mattered? Silence crashed down. Someone coughed. Martha Hendricks looked at her lap. We didn't know it was that bad, someone said from the back. You knew. Cole's voice went hard. Every single one of you knew. You saw her getting thinner. You saw the children's clothes getting more worn. You saw, and you did nothing except talk about what a shame it all was. That's not fair, Mayor Briggs protested. We can't be expected to care? To help? To do more than whisper? Cole shook his head. I'm just one man. I've got one ranch, one pair of hands. And I managed to feed this family for 3 weeks before I asked Lila to marry me. What's your excuse? The silence was absolute now. Lila stood beside him, her chin up, her children pressed close. Emma's hand found his, small and warm. Mrs. Calloway's face had gone red. This is beside the point. The point is that you proposed to Mrs. Hart in the middle of the street after knowing her for less than a month. The point is that you brought scandal to this community. With my what? Cole stepped forward. My kindness? My willingness to help? My refusal to let children starve while you all debated propriety? You made a spectacle. I made a choice, and I'd make it again. Mr. Dawson? Reverend Mitchell's voice cut through, calm but firm. Mrs. Calloway has raised some legitimate concerns about the speed of your courtship and whether what? Lila's voice rang out, surprising everyone, including herself, from the look on her face. But she didn't back down. Whether I married him for money? Whether I trapped him? Whether I'm using him? The Reverend's expression softened. No one is suggesting, yes, they are. Lila's voice shook but held strong. That's exactly what you're all thinking, that I'm some desperate widow who sank her claws into the first man who showed me kindness, that I sold myself and my children for a warm house and full bellies. Mrs. Dawson, well, you're right. She laughed, bitter and bright. I was desperate. I was so desperate I was grinding corn cobs to make flour. I was so desperate I was burning candles down to nothing and then burning the wax. I was so desperate I told my children that eating once a day was normal, that being hungry was just part of life. Her voice broke. She swallowed hard and continued. And yes, when Cole Dawson asked me to marry him, I said yes because I needed help, because I couldn't do it alone anymore, because I was drowning and he threw me a rope. She looked around the church, meeting eyes that wouldn't meet hers. But you know what? He needed us too. He had this big empty house and no one to fill it. He had more money than he could spend and no purpose for it. He was lonely, and we were desperate, and we found each other. That's not a basis for marriage, Mrs. Calloway said stiffly. No? Lila turned to her. What is then? Love at first sight? Years of courtship? Because I loved my first husband, and he left me with nothing but 3 children and a shack that's falling down. So forgive me if I don't think love is the only thing that matters. Lila, Cole started, but she shook her head. No, I need to say this. She faced the congregation fully now, her shoulders back. You all want to know if this marriage is real? If we're doing it for the right reasons? Fine, I'll tell you. I married Cole Dawson because he saw me. Not the widow, not the charity case, not the woman to be pitied. Me. The person who was doing her best and failing anyway. He saw me and he didn't look away. Her voice softened. And every morning for 3 weeks, he left food on my doorstep. Not because he wanted something from me. Not because he expected gratitude or repayment or anything except that I'd feed my children. He gave freely, anonymously, without conditions. And when the town started talking, when his kindness turned into scandal, he didn't hide. He didn't slink away and protect his reputation. He stood in the middle of Main Street and asked me to marry him in front of everyone. She looked at Cole, and her eyes were wet but steady. So yes, I married him quickly. Yes, I barely knew him. Yes, I needed his help. But I also chose him. I chose the man who was brave enough to help when no one else would, who was kind enough to give without taking, who was strong enough to stand here right now and face all of you without flinching. She turned back to the congregation. So if you want to judge this marriage, judge away. But know that your judgment says more about you than it does about us. The church was so quiet Cole could hear the wind outside. Then Emma spoke up, her young voice clear. My mom is the bravest person I know. And Cole's been kinder to us in 2 days than anyone in this town has been in 2 years. So if you want to say bad things about them, you'll have to say them about me too. Because we're a family now. Thomas nodded. Me too. Even Samuel piped up. Me 3. Something shifted in the room. Martha Hendricks stood up, her face flushed. Lila's right. We should be ashamed of ourselves. Martha, her husband started, but she shook her head. No, Tom. She's right. We all saw what was happening, and we told ourselves it wasn't our problem, that Lila was too proud to accept help. But the truth is, we were too comfortable to offer it. She looked at Lila. I'm sorry, we should have done better. Bill Carver stood up next. Martha's right. We failed you, Lila. And Dawson here did what the rest of us should have done months ago. One by one, people began to stand. Not everyone. Mrs. Calloway remained seated, her face like stone, and a few others stayed stubbornly in their pews. But more than half the congregation rose, and the message was clear. Mayor Briggs cleared his throat. Well, I think it's safe to say that this community supports the Dawson family. Mrs. Calloway, I appreciate your concerns, but this is a travesty, she snapped. You're condoning behavior that saved 3 children from starvation, the mayor interrupted, his voice firm. That brought 2 good people together. That reminded us what this community is supposed to be about. He turned to Cole and Lila. I apologize for this meeting. It shouldn't have happened. But it did, Cole said. And now everyone knows where they stand. Indeed, the mayor looked around the room. This meeting is adjourned, and I suggest we all go home and think about what kind of neighbors we want to be. People began to file out, some stopping to offer quiet apologies or congratulations. Mrs. Calloway swept past without a word, her back rigid with indignation. But most of the faces were kind, or at least chastened. When the church finally emptied, only the Dawson family remained, and Reverend Mitchell, who approached slowly. That was quite a speech, Mrs. Dawson. Lila was shaking now, the adrenaline wearing off. I didn't plan it. The best speeches never are. He looked at Cole. I owe you an apology. I should have shut this down before it started. You tried. Not hard enough. The Reverend sighed. For what it's worth, I think you're good for each other, and those children are lucky to have you both. Thank you, Lila said quietly. The Reverend nodded and left them alone in the silent church. Cole turned to Lila, seeing the tears starting to fall now that there was no one left to be strong for. Come here, he said softly. She walked into his arms and broke. Great shaking sobs that she'd been holding back for hours, maybe years. Cole held her tight, one hand in her hair, while the children clustered close. You did so good, he murmured. So good, Lila. I'm so proud of you. I was terrified. I know, but you didn't let them see it. Yes, I did. I was shaking the whole time. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do it anyway. She laughed wetly against his chest. Emma said the same thing. Smart girl. Emma beamed. Thomas and Samuel pressed closer, and suddenly they were all tangled together, 5 people who'd been strangers a week ago, now bound by something stronger than blood. When Lila finally pulled back, her face was blotchy and her eyes were red, but she was smiling. Can we go home now? Yeah, Cole said. Let's go home. The ride back to the ranch was quiet but different from before. Lighter, easier. The children fell asleep in the back, worn out from the emotional weight of the evening. Lila leaned against Cole's shoulder, and he wrapped an arm around her. You know what you said in there, he said quietly, about me being lonely, about needing you as much as you needed me. I'm sorry if it was true. He paused. I've been alone for 15 years. Built this whole life, this whole ranch, and there was no one to share it with. No one to care if I succeeded or failed. I told myself I liked it that way, that I didn't need anyone. And now? Now I know I was lying to myself. He tightened his arm around her. You didn't trap me, Lila. You saved me. She tilted her head to look up at him. From what? From a life that looked successful but felt empty. From waking up every morning and wondering what the point of it all was. From dying alone in a house full of things that didn't matter. Cole, I mean it. You and these kids, you're the point. You're what I've been building toward without knowing it. She reached up and touched his face, her fingers gentle. I think we saved each other. Maybe we did. They rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence, the stars coming out overhead, the night air cold and clean. When they reached the ranch, Cole carried the sleeping children inside one by one while Lila heated water for tea. They sat at the kitchen table long after the children were in bed, talking quietly about everything and nothing. About their childhoods, their fears, their hopes for the future. About how strange it was to be married to someone you were still getting to know. "I don't regret it," Lila said finally. "Any of it. I know I should probably feel rushed or uncertain or... But you don't." "No, it feels right. Terrifying, but right." Cole reached across the table and took her hand. "I'm going to make mistakes. I don't know how to be a husband or a father. I'm going to do things wrong. So will I. But we'll figure it out together." "Together," she agreed. They sat there in the lamplight, hands joined across the table, and Cole thought about the town meeting, about Lila's fierce defense of their family, about the way the children had stood with them without hesitation. They'd faced the worst the town could throw at them, and they'd come through it intact, stronger even. Whatever came next, they'd be ready. Spring arrived in pieces. First the mud, thick and clinging, that turned the ranch yard into a bog. Then the green, pushing up through the last patches of snow in defiant bursts. Finally the warmth, real warmth that made the air smell like earth and possibility. The Dawson Ranch transformed. Lila planted a garden that stretched from the back porch to the fence line, rows of potatoes and carrots, beans climbing stakes, tomato plants that she babied like infants. She worked the soil every morning, her hands black with dirt, her face peaceful in a way Cole had never seen in those first desperate weeks. "You don't have to work this hard," he told her one morning, watching her dig another row. She looked up, squinting against the sun. "I know." "Then why?" "Because I want to. Because I spent 2 years watching things die and now I get to watch them grow." She patted the soil around a seedling with careful hands. "Let me have this." So he did. The children bloomed alongside the garden. Samuel grew bold on horseback, graduating from copper to a smaller gelding that Cole bought specifically for him. The boy rode circuits around the corral every afternoon, his laughter carrying on the wind. Thomas discovered a talent for carpentry, spending hours in the barn with Cole, learning to plane wood and drive nails straight. He was quiet, methodical, taking pride in every project he finished. And Emma read everything she could find. Cole's small collection of books disappeared into her room and returned with careful notes written in the margins. When he asked what she was writing, she showed him thoughts about the stories, questions about the characters, observations about how the words fit together. "You're a writer," he said, surprised. She shrugged, suddenly shy. "I like stories." "Then we need more books." The next time he went to town, he came back with an armful. Novels and histories and poetry collections that made Emma's eyes go wide. She hugged them to her chest like treasure, then hugged him just as tight. "Thank you, Pa." The word landed soft and certain, and Cole felt his throat close. She'd tried it out for weeks, testing it in different contexts, seeing if it fit. Apparently it did. "You're welcome, sweet girl." Life settled into rhythms that felt both new and ancient. Morning chores before breakfast, the children's lessons at the kitchen table while Lila kneaded bread. Afternoon work, Cole and Thomas in the barn, Emma helping her mother, Samuel causing supervised chaos wherever he went. Evenings on the porch, the 5 of them watching the sun drop behind the mountains, too tired for much talk but content in the silence. And slowly, carefully, Cole and Lila learned each other. She liked her coffee black and strong. He took his with enough sugar to make her tease him about having a sweet tooth. She sang while she worked, old songs her mother had taught her, her voice carrying through the house like light through windows. He was quietest in the early mornings, needing an hour of silence before he could face the day. They learned to navigate the small space of marriage, who took which side of the bed, whose turn it was to bank the fire, how to argue without wounding and apologize without pride. It wasn't always smooth. There were days when Lila snapped at him for tracking mud through her clean kitchen, days when Cole retreated into stubborn silence rather than talk about what was bothering him. But they worked through it. One night in early May, after the children were asleep, Lila came to Cole's room. She stood in the doorway in her nightgown, her hair loose around her shoulders, looking uncertain. "Can I come in?" Cole sat up, his heart suddenly loud. "Of course." She crossed to the bed and sat on the edge, her hands folded in her lap. I've been thinking. About? About you sleeping in here. About us being married but living like boarders in the same house. Cole went very still. What are you saying? I'm saying I don't want you to sleep in the spare room anymore. She looked at him, her eyes steady. I want you to come back to our room, to our bed. Lila, I know we agreed to take it slow, and I appreciate that, I do. But it's been 2 months, Cole. 2 months of living together, raising children together, building a life together, and I think... She paused, choosing her words. I think I'm ready for this to be real. All the way real. Cole reached for her hand. It's already real. You know what I mean. He did. He'd been waiting for this moment, hoping for it, but never pushing, never demanding, letting her set the pace, and now here she was, offering herself not out of obligation or gratitude, but choice. Are you sure? He asked quietly. Yes. No hesitation. I'm sure. He stood and crossed to her, pulling her up into his arms. She came willingly, her body fitting against his like it had been made for this. When he kissed her, it was different from that brief kiss in the parlor weeks ago, deeper, hungrier, full of 2 months of wanting and waiting. I love you, he said against her mouth, the words surprising both of them. She pulled back just enough to see his face. Say it again. I love you, Lila Dawson. I think I have since the first time I saw you turn scraps into a feast and make your children believe in better days. Her eyes filled. I love you too. I didn't think I had room in my heart after everything. But you made room. You and your kindness and your stubbornness and your ridiculous need to fix everything. He laughed, low and rough. I can't help it. I know. It's one of the things I love about you. They stood there in the lamplight, holding each other, and Cole felt something unlock in his chest that he hadn't realized was still closed. She chose him. Not because she needed him, though she had. Not because she was grateful, though she was. But because she loved him. That night she didn't go back to her room, and the spare room stayed empty from then on. By midsummer, the ranch was thriving. The cattle were healthy, the crops were coming in, and Cole had hired 2 ranch hands to help with the work. Young men from town who were grateful for steady employment and respectful of the family's privacy. Lila's garden produced more than they could eat. She started preserving, jars of tomatoes and pickles and jam lining the pantry shelves in neat rows. The children helped, even Samuel, who was surprisingly good at sorting beans despite his tendency to eat as many as he shelled. They rode into town once a week for supplies, and the reception was markedly different from those first tense weeks. People waved, asked after the children, treated them like any other family instead of a scandal to be discussed. Mrs. Calloway still crossed to the other side of the street when she saw them coming, but even that felt more like stubbornness than hostility. Martha Hendricks had become a real friend to Lila, visiting the ranch every few weeks with her daughters, letting the children play while the women shared coffee and conversation. One afternoon in late July, Cole came in from the north pasture to find Lila sitting at the kitchen table with an opened letter, her face unreadable. What's wrong? She looked up, her eyes bright. Nothing's wrong. It's just... She held out the letter. It's from my sister, in Kansas City. Cole took it carefully. He knew Lila had a sister, younger by 5 years, who'd married a banker and moved east before Lila's husband died. They'd lost touch in the chaos of widowhood and poverty. What does she say? She wants to visit, she and her husband. They're taking the train west and want to stop here for a few days. Lila's voice went uncertain. I haven't seen her in 3 years. She doesn't even know about you, about any of this. Then we'll tell her. Cole, she's going to have questions. She's going to wonder why I didn't write, why I let things get so bad before you found your way out. He sat down across from her. Lila, you've got nothing to be ashamed of. You survived. You kept your children alive. And now you're building something good. If your sister can't see that, that's her problem, not yours. What if she judges me? Then she joins a long list of people who've underestimated you. He reached across and took her hand. When's she coming? August 15th, 3 weeks. Then we've got 3 weeks to get ready. We'll make her welcome, show her the ranch, let her see how happy the children are. And if she's got opinions about how we did things, we'll listen politely and then show her the door." Lila laughed despite her nerves. "You make it sound so simple." "It is simple. We're happy. We're together. That's all that matters." She squeezed his hand. "You really believe that?" "Every word." The 3 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Lila cleaned the house top to bottom, cooked enough food to feed an army, and worked herself into a state of anxious anticipation that Cole tried unsuccessfully to soothe. "She's going to think I married you out of desperation," Lila fretted the night before her sister's arrival. "You did marry me out of desperation." "That's not helping." Cole pulled her close. "You married me because I was there when you needed someone. But you stayed married to me because you chose to. That's the part that matters." She relaxed against him. "When did you get so wise?" "The day I watched a woman feed her children potato peels and call it a feast." The next afternoon, a hired carriage pulled up to the ranch. Cole stood on the porch with Lila, the children arranged around them like soldiers preparing for inspection. Emma had insisted on wearing her Sunday dress. Thomas had combed his hair flat. Samuel bounced on his toes, too excited to stand still. The carriage door opened and a woman stepped out, younger than Lila, dressed in city clothes that looked absurdly formal against the backdrop of the ranch. Her husband followed, a tall, thin man with spectacles and careful movements. "Catherine," Lila breathed. The sisters looked at each other across the distance of the yard. Then Catherine's face crumpled, and she ran. They met halfway, colliding in a tangle of arms and tears and 3 years of silence. Cole heard Catherine's voice, high and broken. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't come sooner. I didn't know how bad it was. Your letter said everything was fine, and I believed you because I wanted to, and—" "Hush," Lila said, holding her tight. "You're here now. That's what matters." They pulled apart, both crying, both laughing. Catherine turned to the children, her hand flying to her mouth. "Emma, is that you? You're so tall. And Thomas, oh, Thomas, you look just like your father. And who's this?" She crouched down to Samuel's level. "You must be Samuel. I haven't seen you since you were a baby." Samuel hid behind Lila's skirts, suddenly shy. Catherine straightened, looking past them to Cole. "And you must be the famous Mr. Dawson." "Cole," he said, offering his hand. "And this is my wife's sister, which makes you family. You're welcome here." Catherine shook his hand, studying his face with sharp eyes. "My sister writes that you're a good man." "I try." "She also writes that you saved her life." "She saved mine first." Catherine's expression shifted. Surprise, then understanding, then something that looked like approval. "Well, I think we have a lot to talk about." They spent the next 3 days catching up. Catherine and her husband, David, quiet and bookish, settled into the spare room and fell easily into the rhythm of ranch life. Catherine helped Lila in the garden, interrogated Cole about his intentions with the thoroughness of a lawyer, and spent hours playing with the children who'd been strangers to her until now. On the second night, after the children were in bed, the 4 adults sat on the porch with coffee and watched the stars come out. "I need to apologize," Catherine said quietly. "When John died, I should have come. I should have helped you instead of just sending letters asking if you were all right." "You had your own life," Lila said. "That's no excuse. You're my sister, and I let you struggle alone because it was easier than facing how bad things were." Catherine's voice thickened. "When I got your last letter, the one that said you'd remarried, I almost didn't come. I was afraid you'd done something desperate, married some awful man just to survive." "I did marry out of desperation," Lila admitted, "but not desperation for money or security, desperation to give my children a chance. And I got lucky. I got Cole." Catherine looked at him. "She says you left food on her doorstep for weeks without telling her." "Yes, ma'am." "Why?" "Because she needed it, and because I could. Most men would have expected something in return. I'm not most men." Catherine smiled. "No, I can see that." She turned back to Lila. "You love him." It wasn't a question, but Lila answered anyway. "With everything I have." "And he loves you." "He does." "Then I'm happy for you." Catherine reached across and squeezed Lila's hand. You deserve this. After everything you've been through, you deserve happiness. So do you, Lila said softly. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the night air warm and sweet. Then David spoke up, his voice thoughtful. I've been watching the children, watching the way they interact with you both. And I have to say, Mr. Dawson, Cole, I've never seen children more secure, more loved. Whatever happened in the past, you've built something remarkable here. Cole felt his throat tighten. They make it easy. No, David said firmly. Children don't make anything easy. But you've chosen to love them anyway. That takes character. They're mine, Cole said simply. Blood or not, they're mine. Emma's voice came from the doorway, sleepy and small. Pa? I had a bad dream. Cole stood and crossed to her, scooping her up, even though she was getting too big for it. What about, sweet girl? That we had to leave, that this wasn't real. It's real, he promised, carrying her back to bed. This is real, and you're staying, and nothing's going to change that. Promise? Promise. He tucked her in, kissed her forehead, and returned to the porch to find Lila wiping tears from her face. She still has nightmares, she told Catherine, about going back to the shack, about being hungry again. How often? Less than before. But still, Lila's voice broke. I hate that she has to carry that all of them do. They're children, Catherine said gently. They'll heal, especially here, with you two. I hope so. I know so. I've seen the way they look at Cole, like he hung the moon. Catherine paused. That's not something you can fake. That's earned. Cole looked at Lila, saw the love and gratitude and hope shining in her eyes, and felt his heart swell so large it hurt. This was what he'd been building toward his entire life. Not the ranch, not the money, not the success. This family sitting on this porch under these stars together. When Catherine and David left 3 days later, there were promises to visit again, to write more often, to stay connected. Catherine hugged Lila so tight she lifted her off the ground. You did good, sister. You found yourself a good man and you made a good life. I'm proud of you. Thank you for coming, for seeing it. Thank you for letting me. Catherine turned to Cole. Take care of her and those babies. Every day of my life, Cole promised. They stood in the yard and waved as the carriage pulled away, the children calling out goodbyes until it disappeared around the bend. Then Lila sagged against Cole, relief and exhaustion written across her face. That went well? Better than well. She loves you. She was always the generous one. Lila smiled up at him. Thank you for being so patient with her questions. She had a right to ask them. You're her sister. Still, you handled it beautifully. Emma tugged at Cole's sleeve. Can we have a picnic, since we don't have to be fancy anymore? Cole laughed. We were being fancy? Mama made us wear shoes the whole time. A travesty, Cole agreed solemnly. All right, picnic it is. They spent the afternoon by the creek, shoes abandoned, the children wading in the shallows while Lila and Cole sat on a blanket and watched. The sun was warm, the water was clear, and Samuel's laughter echoed off the canyon walls. I need to tell you something, Lila said quietly. Cole tensed. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. It's just... She took a breath. I recognized you that first morning when you left the basket. Cole went very still. What? I saw you through the slats in the wall. You were trying so hard to be quiet, to not wake us, but I was already awake. I'd been awake all night trying to figure out how to make nothing last another day. She looked at him, her eyes bright. I saw you leave the basket. I saw you wait on that ridge to make sure I found it. And I knew. Why didn't you say anything? Because I was ashamed. Because accepting anonymous charity was hard enough without putting a name and a face to it. And because... She paused. Because I wanted to see what you'd do, if you'd keep helping, or if it was just a one-time thing. Cole felt something crack open in his chest. You knew the whole time. Not the whole time, but from that first morning, yes. And every morning after, I watched for you. Started leaving the flowers, the drawings, the little gifts, hoping you'd understand that I saw you too, that I was grateful. Why tell me now? Because you've been carrying this idea that you rescued me, that you swept in and saved the helpless widow and her children, and I need you to know, her voice went fierce. You didn't rescue me, Cole. You saw me. You witnessed my struggle, and you chose to help, yes, but I was the one who survived. I was the one who kept my children alive. I was the one who chose you back. I know that. Do you? Because sometimes I see you looking at us like you can't believe we're real, like we're going to disappear if you stop watching. And I need you to understand that we're here because we want to be, not because we need you, though we do, but because we love you. Cole pulled her close, his face buried in her hair. I spent 15 years alone, building this place, building this life, and I told myself it was enough, that I didn't need anyone else. And then I saw you through those slats in that shack, and everything I'd convinced myself of fell apart. I know the feeling. You made me want more, want better, want family and noise and mess and all the complicated, beautiful things that come with letting people in. So we saved each other. Yeah, he said roughly. We did. They sat there by the creek watching their children play, and Cole thought about that first morning, the hunger and shame and desperate hope he'd witnessed through the broken slats. Thought about the baskets, the flowers, the slow, careful dance of two people learning to trust. He thought he was giving them a home, but they'd given him one first. The summer stretched long and golden, each day bleeding into the next in a rhythm that felt eternal. The children grew browner, wilder, more secure. Emma started writing her own stories, reading them aloud at dinner to applause and gentle critiques. Thomas built a wooden box for his treasures. Every joint fitted perfect. Samuel learned to whistle, much to everyone's regret. And Cole and Lila learned what it meant to be partners, not just in marriage, but in the daily work of building a life. They fought sometimes, usually about small things that masked bigger fears. But they always came back to each other, always talked it through, always chose each other again. One evening in September, as the aspens began to turn gold and the air took on an edge of cold, Cole found Lila standing at the bedroom window, looking out at the land spread vast and beautiful beneath the setting sun. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. She leaned back against him. "About how different this is from a year ago. How I was so scared and so tired and so certain that we'd never make it through another winter. And now? Now I'm standing in a warm house with a full pantry and 3 healthy children and a husband who loves me. And I keep waiting for someone to tell me I don't deserve it, that it's too good to be true." Cole turned her around to face him. "You deserve every bit of this. Every meal, every safe night, every moment of peace. You earned it by surviving when giving up would have been easier." "I couldn't give up. I had the children." "Exactly. You fought for them every single day. And now you get to rest. You get to be happy. You get to plant gardens and preserve tomatoes and watch your daughter write stories without worrying about where the next meal is coming from." Lila's eyes filled. "I love you so much it scares me sometimes." "Good. I'd be worried if it didn't." She laughed, wet and bright. "We're going to be all right, aren't we?" "Better than all right." Cole kissed her forehead. "We're going to be happy. For the rest of our lives, we're going to be happy. Promise?" "Promise." That night, they gathered on the porch as they always did. The 5 of them arranged in a comfortable tangle, watching the stars emerge one by one. Samuel fell asleep in Lila's lap. Thomas leaned against Cole's shoulder. Emma sat on the porch rail, her book forgotten in her lap, her face peaceful. "Tell us the story again," Thomas said quietly. "About how you and Mama met." Cole glanced at Lila, who smiled and nodded. "All right, it started with a basket." He told it simply, leaving out the worst parts, the hunger, the desperation, the fear. Just the essentials. A man who saw a family in need, a woman who was too proud to ask for help, and the slow, careful way they'd found each other through acts of kindness and courage. "And then what?" Samuel mumbled, half asleep. "Then we got married," Lila said softly. "And we brought you here, and we became a family." "A real family?" Emma asked. "The realest kind," Cole said firmly. "The kind you choose." Emma smiled, satisfied, and went back to her book. Thomas's breathing evened out into sleep. Samuel snored softly against Lila's chest. Cole and Lila sat in the gathering dark, their children safe and warm around them, and watched the stars multiply overhead. The wind carried the smell of sage and pine. Somewhere in the distance a coyote called. The ranch settled into silence, solid and real in theirs. "Thank you," Lila whispered. "For what?" "For seeing me. For choosing us. For building this. Thank you for saying yes. For trusting me. For loving me back." She reached across and took his hand, their fingers intertwining like they'd been made to fit. "I would choose you again every single time." "Good," Cole said, "because you're stuck with me now." "I can live with that." They sat together under the stars, their family sleeping peaceful and safe, and Cole felt a contentment so deep it bordered on joy. He'd built this ranch from nothing, board by board, fence post by fence post, dream by stubborn dream. But it had never been a home until Lila and her children had filled it with life and laughter and love. He'd thought he was rescuing them. But the truth was simpler and more profound. They'd rescued each other. And together they'd built something that would last. Not just walls and a roof, but a family bound by choice and tested by hardship and strengthened by love. The kind of family that could weather any storm. The kind of family that made every struggle worth it. The kind of family that turned a house into a home and a lonely man into a father and a desperate widow into a partner. The kind of family that was, finally and completely, whole.